Morning came harshly, like a torment. I did not think I partook in the drink too heavily the night prior, but the pounding headache I awoke with suggested otherwise. I stumbled out of bed with the grace of a drunkard, half blinded by the faint light which streamed through my window. I was almost definitely too far in my years to be drinking like a juvenile, but I made the foolish decision to make an exception that previous night. But I knew the toils of the day were far from over, for I now had Echo living under my roof, if only temporarily. If there was even the tiniest chance that her babbling fears from the night prior came to fruition, then the days ahead would be tenebrous, to say the least of them. I made few attempts to quell the torment ravaging my mind, for I knew more than anything else that the greatest cure for a hangover was time. I dearly wished I could have simply went back to sleep, but that pleasant siren song no longer called out to me, and so I could not find comfort in its embrace no longer. When I made my way into the kitchen, I found Echo already there, quietly nibbling away at a rather plain-looking sandwich, which, as I continued to stare at her, I believed that her paltry meal did not even hold any contents at all. "Good morning," I said as I sat down opposite to her. "How are you feeling?" She looked up at me with a quickly fading smile. "I've been better." I continued to stare at the bread in her hands. "If you're hungry, I can have my assistant make something for you." "I'm fine, thanks," she said as she set it aside. "The only thing I can really suggest is that you do something to take your mind off of it. For the time being, the whisk will still take a few days to arrive," I said. "I don't really use it myself, but my entertainment suite should still work." "I'm fine, thanks," she said. "I don't think this is something I can easily take my mind off of." I left her to her own devices for some time, mainly because I too had a lot on my mind and did not wish to burden her with my own troubles. The recent news had no doubt been shocking, but their mere notion that in some way she might be connected to them, and by extension myself, filled me with a lingering sense of unease that did not deign it necessary to leave me alone. There was a cruel hand of fate at play, and I knew not where or when it would strike next. I resigned to my office once again, weighing the possible benefits that would arise from indulging in the drink once again, but I ultimately decided to abstain for my own sake. Even though I dearly wished for nothing more than something to soothe my nerves, if only for just a moment, it was not worth the agony it would inflict on me in time. There was no doubt in my mind that there was a chance that war would break out from that recent conflict, and while I originally thought that I was not in a position that I would be affected by it, considering our kind didn't take too kindly to war, recent events had come to cloud my judgment. Even though I would not be called in to serve in conflict, should such a thing occur, there was a scant chance that the humans would choose to retaliate for what we had done, and I had simply refrained from checking recent updates on the event at hand for fear the worst had come. But nonetheless, I knew I would have to eventually, and so I took to my phone and searched for what I hoped to be good news. But what I found instead was a complete absence of anything. No real statements issued by any authority, a complete vacuum of communication. It was possible that talks were going on behind closed doors that we were not privy to, but I had hoped for at least some news. I tried to put such thoughts to the back of my mind as I went about the rest of my day. In time, it seemed Echo returned to at least half of her usual self, but there would be moments where the light would fade from her eyes, if only for a moment, like a recognition of the bad hand she had been dealt. Nonetheless, it felt like the day went by with little hassle. But as I settled in to sleep once again, I checked my phone once more and saw that there had been a deluge of news in the past hour alone. There had been confirmations of attempted peace talks from all major players involved in the incident, my kind no exception, but rumors of non-cooperativeness on the side of the humans, which I could not fault them for. There were also sorts of rumors and fabricated news flying about. It was hard to make sense of what was legitimate and what was merely contrived garbage thought up to drive traffic, but I found myself scouring the airwaves for hours on end that night, trying to make sense of the madness that had overcome us all so suddenly. The midst of all that chaos, I did not notice the message I received from the Whisk until the next morning, telling me that they would arrive the next afternoon, a day sooner than they had initially promised, which was both a blessing and a curse, for it was good news that I could impart upon Echo, but unfortunate in the sense that I had not yet decided what I wanted to do. If I chose to send her off and stay behind, there was a fleeting chance I could be caught up in all the madness should a war break out. When I broke the news to Echo, she almost immediately asked the question I could not answer. "Are you coming with me?" "I don't know just yet," I told her truthfully. "I've been thinking about it a lot." "There's been news of peace talks," she said, as she waved her phone around. "Maybe war won't break out after all." "That would be for the best," I said, "and if you're lucky you might not even have to leave." "No," she said as a scowl came to form upon her face. "I have to leave. I want to leave." She approached me without warning and dug her claws into my shirt. "But I want you to come with me." "I need some more time to think about it," I said as I backed away from her. "I'm sorry." Before long I received a message from the Whisk that they had arrived at the spaceport, and we made measures to depart. I thought it was for the best that we leave as soon as possible, for there was no chance dallying around any longer, and the longer I waited, the more clouded my judgment would become. We had my assistant chauffeur us to the spaceport, as neither of us had learned how to drive in all of our years. No sooner than we had driven out of the driveway and down onto the street, I felt the ironclad grasp of Echo upon my shoulder and her ragged voice. "Look, they just parked in front of your house," she said, with her head turned entirely around and twisted glare upon her visage. I turned around to see what she had called out, and as I did, I felt my heart beat down in my chest, for I spied just outside my house an ominous-looking car, black as night, with two uniformed men just stepping out of it. "We got out just in time," she said, as her grip upon my shoulder tightened. I looked towards my assistant, whose expression was unchanged from the ordeal at hand. He no doubt knew the severity of the situation, and I was thankful that he was not one who would rat us out for such a thing. I hoped that the rest of the day would go smoothly, and that if those uniformed men, who were no doubt the upper echelon of the police, came for me in time, I would not be found accountable for any of my actions. I settled back into my seat and tried to relax for the rest of the journey, but as we continued to travel down familiar roads, we suddenly came down unfamiliar street, and as we did so, I immediately felt my blood run cold. I'd been to the spaceport far too many times to count, and I knew even for a detour that I was going down the wrong path. I looked to the front of the vehicle and watched my assistant through the mirror, wondering if he had realized his mistake, or if it was never one at all. "You're going the wrong way," I said, seeing no need to hide my concerns. "Major police presence on the usual path," he said, with a chill in his voice, as his locked onto my own through the mirror. "I'm taking a detour." "Very well," I said, even though I still had my doubts, but I ultimately did not think he was one to betray me, for if he wished to do so, he merely could have called the police to my house the previous day. And because he had not done such a thing, I believed that such fears were unfounded, but I still couldn't shake that nagging feeling from my mind, like there was something dearly important which I had missed. I was so enraptured by my own thoughts that I did not even register the crash as it unfolded around me, and as I sat in that mess of broken metal, I felt a screaming pain ring out in my mind, and a dullness throughout my entire body. "You okay?" I felt Echo place a hand upon my shoulder, far more gently than she had done so before. And only then did I come to register the scene around me. And only then did I gaze towards the front of the vehicle to see my assistant sprawled out across the dashboard, blood staining his once immaculate white fur. His body was twisted and contorted in degrees that I thought impossible, and I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that he had perished long before I had even set eyes upon him. I could spot another car, through the shattered windshield, in a similar state of disrepair, as well as a unholy howling which came from its confines. There was a man who had been thrown through the windshield, and the contents of his cranium only served to paint the battered car a dismal shade of crimson. I'm fine, I said, unsure if those words were even the truth. I checked my body and was glad to see that I was uninjured, and I could say the same for Echo. It was by perhaps some divine miracle that the two of us had been spared from a worse fate, or perhaps a sign of worse things to come. There came the song of sirens from out in the distance, and I knew soon that they would descend upon us. "We have to leave," said Echo, as she dragged me from my almost catatonic state in my seat, for I was still struggling to adapt to the situation at hand. They might recognize me. I knew that even if they would not recognize her, we would no doubt be held behind by the chaos which had just occurred, and in the situation she had found herself in, that was beyond lethal. The two of us clambered out of the car, much to the surprised gasps of those around us. Considering the state of the wreckage behind us, they must have expected no survivors from such a disaster. But we walked out seemingly unscathed. There were those that attempted to come to our aid, but Echo pushed them away as we ambled off into the distance, without a soul daring intervene in our escape.